Hi, I'm a hard times guy. Today I want to talk to you about my grandmother, Wirtus Eddington. Her main name was Hudson, Wirtus Hudson. Her parents were Ollie and Toki Hudson. A couple of things about Wirtus and as they relate to my childhood memories of her. The first thing I'm going to talk about is automobiles. And I think there's a video about some of this too. The first car that I remember my grandparents having was an old Packard. And I'm thinking it was a 48 or 49 Packard. And I can't say that I remember ever them driving it or it being on the road or serviceable at their home. It probably was in my lifetime, but I don't remember it. I remember it sitting on concrete blocks with no wheels on it in their side yard at 6th and T Street. And I made a video about my grandfather and cutting that Packard up with a cutting torch and me helping him load it into the back of his old red and black Dodge pickup truck and hauling it to Rainey's junkyard. And that happened over a period of weeks, and I don't know who else was involved, but I made a video about that. So the first vehicle I remember them having that my grandmother may have driven was that 48 Packard, but I'm not even sure she ever drove it. I'm not even sure she had her driver's license until 1955, and she got a brand new car then. It was a 1955 plain Jane 4-door sedan Chevrolet. Had a 6-cylinder engine, automatic transmission, no carpets, had rubber floors. I don't know whether it had a radio. I think it had a heater. I don't know whether it had a radio or not. And back in those days, they put brown paper over the doors on new cars, and so the inside of the car had brown paper on the doors. She never took that off. When she traded that car in later for another vehicle, it still had that brown paper on it. I remember that car, and I rode in that car many times. And so that's going to take me to the next part of this story, where I'm going to talk about WPA lakes. Those of you who know about WPA, WPA stands for Works Progress Administration. It was something enacted during President Roosevelt, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President Roosevelt. That would be during his time as president. And if you know your history, you also know that during his time as president, some other things happened. And one of the things that happened prior to him being president was, or during the terms of his first, when he was first president, the country had a depression, and everybody was having hard times, and people were out of work, and something needed to be done, and the government created this program to create work for people who needed work and to help our country get out of a depression. And one of the things that they did many things, but I'm going to just talk about one today. They built lakes and ponds. They built some rather large lakes, and then they built lakes diminishing in size down to, they were technically lakes because they were spring fed, but they were on some private property, and they served as a pond. And when this happened, In order for the landowner to get this free lake or pond constructed for him, he agreed to certain things, and one of them was he would allow access to the lake or pond. He would allow access to the public to that lake or pond for a certain number of years. I don't know how many years it was, and I don't know when it began and when it ended, but I do know this, that during my childhood, that policy was still in effect, and my grandmother loved to fish, and she knew where these local Lawrence County WPA lakes and ponds were, and she went to them and took advantage of the fact that they were accessible to the public. And where I enter into that is I love to fish too. And when I was a young boy, my grandmother used to take me fishing. And most of the trips that we ever made were in that 1955 Chevrolet. I can remember her calling and my mom on the phone, and she said, "It's Grandma. She wants to know if you want to go fishing." And of course, I always wanted to go fishing, and so then I'd scurry to get my stuff together and get my fishing clothes on and go out on the porch and wait for Grandma to pull up in front of the house and honk in that chocolate-covered 1955 Chevrolet, and off we'd go fishing somewhere. And often it was one of these WPA lakes, so I'm going to talk to you about them for a second. The first one I'm going to talk about is what I would call Stipp Lake. And Stipp Lake was on a farm on the east side of the road when you're going north on Pleasant Run Road. If you don't know where Pleasant Run Road is, and you're familiar today with where Bedford North Lawrence High School is, if you go to the road that would take you to the entrance to Bedford North Lawrence High School, it's called Star Boulevard. That little stretch of road, but that stretch of road didn't used to be there. That road came into existence when the high school was built. But once you cross Highway 58 going north, that same road extended is Pleasant Run Road. It goes to the Pleasant Run community. The most significant landmark in that community would be the Pleasant Run Church, which is at an intersection on Pleasant Run Road, north of the high school. So when you go north on Pleasant Run Road, the high school, you pass Stipp Lake. It's out in the pasture over there to the right if you're going north. East of the road, there's looks like a farm pond out there in a low place, and that's Stipp Lake. My grandmother and I, when I was a boy, fished there many times. The next one of these lakes, I think the name of it is Anderson Lake, but I'm not certain of that. If I were to have to be pressed on it and make a wager one way or the other, I would say it's Anderson Lake. But what I am certain of is where it is. It is on it's on the north side of Seabolt Quarry Road, and it's out very much like Stipp Lake, out on a farm in a pasture in a low spot. Was a WPA lake created by the WPA and open to the public. In fact, that one, when you went to that one, the farmer had erected a staircase, 1, 2, 3 steps, I think, 1, 2, 3 steps up a angled steps ladder situation that came to a platform at the top of the fence. You went across the platform and down the steps on the other side, angled steps, and he had put that there so people didn't tear his fence up trying to cross through his fence or over his fence. He knew he had to let people go fishing there, and lots of people did, and he erected that step arrangement so that you could get go fishing in that lake without tearing up his fence. So that was another one that my grandmother and I frequented when I was a boy. We'd go fishing. We'd go to that lake on Seabolt Quarry Road, and I think it was named Anderson Lake. I would mention that one too, and a lot of these trips that I went on, it was just my grandmother and I. In fact, I'd say the majority of them, when I went fishing with my grandmother, it was her and it was me, and that was it. But occasionally, my grandfather went, and one of the places that I remember him going to one time was Anderson Lake. He sat there in a lawn chair and fished way out in the middle of the lake, and he used the small bluegill that I was catching as bait for his large hook out in the middle of the lake. I don't remember whether he ever caught anything doing that or not, but I remember that one because I'd get all excited. I'd catch a little bluegill and I'd run up to where Grandpa was, and he'd put it in a minute bucket there, and he was using my fish that I caught for bait for fish he was trying to catch. And Kurt, I remember Kurt being at that particular lake too, so every time I went fishing with Grandma, it wasn't just he and I, because I remember a few times at that particular lake, Kurt being along for the excursion. So that's the second WPA lake or pond that I remember from my youth and going fishing with my grandmother in her 1955 Chevrolet. The last one, and I only remember one time going there, and I think we only went there one time. And probably this particular lake, I went to it more than any of the others, but I went to it after I was old enough to drive and go places myself, and I'd go fishing with my friends or buddies. And one of the places that we went was a lake called Bat Hollow Lake. And it was the larger of the three lakes I'm talking about today. It also was the hardest one to get to, the most difficult. It was, you had to go back. I guess you didn't have to go this way, but the way we always went, we went past the farmhouse that owned the lake and down over a hill behind it, and then we crossed someone else's property, went up a big hollow called Bat Hollow. We crossed property to get to the Churchill property where the lake was, and that's how you got into that lake. And it was, I don't know how far it was, but it's quite a hike back in there. The very first time I went there, I went with my dad. One of our neighbors had caught some really nice bluegill at that place, and he told my dad about it. And the next opportunity we had, Dad and I went and found that lake and hiked in there. We went in there before daylight with flashlights, walking back trying to find Bat Hollow Lake. I remember that as a young boy. We didn't have near the success there as our neighbor had, but we went there and fished, me and my dad, and I think that's the only time he ever went there. He didn't catch enough fish to make him happy enough with it that he was willing to make that hike again. But later on in life, I went there lots of times. I liked to bass fish. That lake had some nice bass in it. There used to be an old boat down there that was semi-floatable, and we'd go there and work on it and make sure it wasn't going to sink with us out in the middle. And there was even times where me and a friend of mine carried a canoe in there one time to fish in that lake. But Grandma and I went there, and what I remember about that particular trip was she caught quite a few nice crappie that day. And I didn't catch anything. I didn't catch a single fish. Grandma caught a lot of nice crappie, but she and I never went back there. The reason she never went back there was I think she didn't want to make that long hike that it took to go back in there. I already mentioned that I think that was on the Churchill farm, and I think it was the Churchill farm in those days, but I didn't know the Churchills. Later on in life, Betty and I got married, and I've come to find out that Bat Hollow Lake was on her Aunt Peggy's farm. Betty's mother was Mary Robbins, and she had a sister. I think maybe her name was Gladys. I'm not sure, but everybody called her Peggy. She was Peggy Robbins, and she married Roy Scherschel, and Roy Scherschel and Peggy Robbins owned a farm that Bat Hollow Lake was on the backside of. And so I think that Bat Hollow Lake is still in their family. I think Phil, Roy's oldest boy, I think he owns that property now that Bat Hollow Lake is on. So that's Bat Hollow Lake. That's the end of that is the end of the WPA portion and the Grandma Wertis taking me fishing portion of this video. The next thing I want to talk about is when she got rid of that 1955 Chevrolet. And I think I've already said, I think she got that Chevrolet and her driver's license about simultaneously. I may be wrong about that, but I don't think Grandma drove before she got that 1955 Chevrolet. But yeah, if she did, she was fond of that car. But it got to a point where she got to thinking that she needed a newer, better vehicle. Of course, my dad that time was he was in business for himself as a used car dealer, and so he seized upon that opportunity and he sold her, or he traded her out of that 55 Chevrolet. He traded her a 1962, I think, but it might have been 61 Oldsmobile station wagon for her 1955 Chevrolet. Just to make this part of the story short, she hated that 1961 or 2 light blue Oldsmobile station wagon. It was too big, too bulky, too unlike what she had been used to, and she hated it, and I don't think she kept it a week. She immediately decided she didn't like it, couldn't stand it, wasn't going to have it, and she wanted Dad to find her a Chevrolet. Well, Dad didn't have a Chevrolet. He thought that would satisfy her needs. The only Chevrolet he had at that time that was been appropriate for him trying to sell her in place of that Oldsmobile station wagon was a 1962 Impala Super Sport 2-door hardtop. And you say, what's wrong with that? And I say, nothing. Nothing's wrong with that. But it just didn't seem like the vehicle for an elderly woman like my grandmother. And when I say elderly woman, I don't know how old she was at the time. She probably wasn't that elderly. I'm going to guess she was maybe what today I'd consider a young woman, maybe in her early 60s. She's probably about the same age as the model of the car, 61, 62, somewhere in there. But she got a 1962 gold Impala Super Sport 2-door hardtop. And that car was, like you'd imagined, every young man's dream in those days, and even today. I'd love to have that car. And it was, we should have kept it, because it was, not only was it a 1962 Impala 2-door hardtop Super Sport, and a great color gold, that metallic gold that they made them in that year, but it was rare in the fact that it was a 283 engine. Those of you who don't know, I'm going to tell you, Chevrolet, General Motors, came out with the 327 engine that year. It was a new V8, not the newest, or it was the newest, but not the biggest V8 they'd made. They started making them what they called the 348 in I think 1958. So they had a 265 and 56. Then they made that a little bigger engine, turned it into a 283 in 57, and then in 58 they came out with an even bigger engine, the 348, which was a different block configuration. So they had 283s and 348s, and then in '62 they replaced the 348 with the 327, which was back to the 283 block configuration, but a more powerful, a larger than 283, and a more powerful engine. I think the first ones had like 250 horsepower for one version of it and 300 horsepower for the other version of it. So when it was a car like the Super Sport, most of those had that new 327 engine in them. Grandma's was unusual in that it had the older standard version 283 V8. Of course, some of the Chevrolets too also had a 6-cylinder engine, but not Super Sports. So anyway, we should have kept that car. That car would be worth a lot of money nowadays. I think maybe Mom was my mother. After Grandma died, she may have gotten that car somehow. I think she had it towards the end of its existence in our family, and I don't know what happened to it or what she did with it, or even, I'm not even sure she even had it, but somebody had it after Grandma died, and it went somewhere else. We didn't have the foresight to put that car in the garage somewhere and keep it. But last thing I'm going to say about that, maybe end this video up with it. My cousin, Jamie, most of you, if you're on social media, you know him as Jim Wilson. He's my cousin, 2 years older than me, graduated in 1963. He went to the Bedford prom, and he drove Grandma's car that night to the prom. He took this 1962, his grandmother's 1962 Impala gold two-door hardtop Super Sport. He took it to the prom. And so I happen to know that he's got probably more pictures about things that went on in the family, and especially in his part of the family, than any normal human being would have. He has them, the old pictures archived and organized, and he's got tons of them, and a lot of them are converted to the word escapes me, but you can put them on your computer and look at them. He's got them like that, so if you get a hold of him, I'm sure he's got some pictures of this 1962 Impala Super Sport that I'm talking about. Maybe you can get him to share some of those pictures with you. I think maybe I have one or two pictures of that car, but I couldn't tell you where they are. They're probably not when it was pristine. They're probably later on when it was the bumpers were rusty on it. So that about winds up this video about my grandmother. There is one thing I want to say to end this video. The other day, and I like to watch the RFD channel. If you don't know what the RFD channel is, and you're on DirecTV, it's channel 345. Go take a look at it. A lot of interesting stuff there. Right now, the big rodeo in Las Vegas is going on there, but I watch a program on there called Somewhere West of Wall Street. Old man looks kind of like me, white hair, white beard, kind of gruffy old man, has a program on there called Somewhere West of Wall Street, and he talks about all kinds of things. Does a lot better job of it than I do, and it's an interesting program, and I'll watch it. One of the things he does at the end of the program is, when it's all about over with, he says, well, my old daddy used to say, we got this one saucered and blowed, and we need to move on, do other things. And then he gives us a word of wisdom. And I thought that I might start ending my program with a word of wisdom for you. And I thought the most important thing I could tell you right now, to start this with, there is a God. There is a God, and I'm convinced he is the Jehovah God of the Bible. And the thought I want to leave you with is this. The Jehovah God, the head of the trilogy in the Bible, is big. There is a God. He is big, bigger than you can imagine. So think about that a little bit, and I might carry that thought on at the end of the next video. Until then, I'm the Hard Times Guy. You have a good day.